day, everyone. My name is Rich Chester, and I'm the Director of Business Intelligence at LPA Software Solutions. It's my pleasure to be with you today to talk to you about what's new in the IBM Cognos Analytics release 11.1.5 and 11.1.6. Today's webinar, like all our webinars, is being recorded, and you can pick up any of our previously presented webinars on our website, www.lpa.com/resources, or on our YouTube channel. There you'll find our entire series of what's new in Cognos Analytics, both videos like today's, which are features and functions by release, as well as some deep dives into things like data modules, explorations, dashboards, and so on. In addition to our Cognos Analytics videos, you'll also find videos on topics like financial performance management using planning analytics and TM1, advanced analytics, Watson technologies, information management, and more. We hope that you'll find that this is a valuable asset, a learning tool, as you continue on your analytics journey. And while on that journey, you might find from time to time that you could use a little help, and LPA would be proud to earn your business. In my area, the business intelligence space, some of the services we offer include upgrades and migrations, upgrading from previous versions of Cognos, like Cognos 7, Cognos 8, Cognos 10, up to the latest version of 11, as well as migrations from other technologies than Cognos into the Cognos technology stack. Perhaps you just have a big backlog of reporting you'd like some help with. We have a bunch of LPA report writing experts available to speedily, efficiently, and accurately create reports for you so that you can tackle that backlog quickly and expeditiously. Perhaps you'd like to outsource some or all of the day-to-day care and feeding of your Cognos environment, perhaps to free up your Cognos administrators to do other value-added things within your organization. LPA has a wide range of managed service offerings that do a little or take over literally the entire day-to-day maintenance and management of your Cognos and anything in between. Perhaps you'd like a health check. Maybe your environment is running slowly, or maybe your environment has intermittent errors, or perhaps you're just curious whether or not you've modeled according to best practices, or your reports have been authored, or security has been set in a best practices fashion. That's exactly what an LPA health check will help you determine. Not only will we review all of those aspects relative to best practices and our 15 plus years of experience, we'll also give you explicit recommendations. We'll tell you what we found. We'll tell you what was good. We'll tell you what can be improved. We'll give you a notion of what the low-hanging fruit is for improvements that will be very quickly implemented and immediately achieve results, as well as some of those more subtle, perhaps more mini project-oriented opportunities. Ultimately, a health check can validate your environment and make sure that it's a great foundation on which to build, whether building means upgrading or building means rolling out some of the new features and functions contained in Cognos Analytics. And finally, we have training services, both on-site training as well as, much more popular nowadays, remote training options. We have written all of our own training materials specific to Cognos Analytics, including administration, basic report authoring, advanced report authoring, specialty areas in authoring like dimensional authoring and active reports writing, as well as the new features, as you might imagine, dashboards, data modules, and some of the tried and true technologies like Framework Manager, Dynamic Cubes, Transformer, PowerPlay Studio, and more. And even if LPA doesn't have a specific training manual that we have written, we have access to the entire library of training manuals from IBM. In terms of delivery, we can deliver on-site where our instructor comes to you and delivers right there and can even leverage your data in many of our classes. We also have options where our instructors are remote, as are your students. This can really facilitate the training of folks who are in multiple locations, perhaps in different time zones. Recently, I've even delivered to folks who are in different countries using this remote option. And our remote options can indeed include accessing the customer data, as well as can be done independent of your Cognos environment, so that you can leverage sample data, but you can learn all of the tools and techniques and not have to necessarily worry about exposing your data to an LPA instructor, or perhaps because of sensitive data internally, it's hard to find, say, one set of data that everyone can see that you'd like to train. Regardless of the data needs, regardless of the class you need, we can do an on-site or remote training of any Cognos Analytics topic that you need. Now, if you happen to be watching today's webinar live, then this slide might be of very great interest to you. If you have training needs now, in May, we have a 25% off remote training going on. Report authoring Jumpstart, Cognos data modules, and Cognos dashboards and stories on the 4th, 11th, and 18th of May. If these are classes that you believe that your organization could leverage, and you'd like 25% off our normal prices, then please go to lpa.com/events. In the calendar, find the class you want on the 4th, the 11th, and or the 18th. Click on that class, and you'll be able to register right there. Now, on to 11.1.5 and 11.1.6. This webinar has an awful lot of information to convey. And quite honestly, I'm not sure that in an hour I can get through all of the enhancements in both of these releases and do demos and or take questions. So we're going to approach today's webinar a little bit differently than the ones we have done in the past. In the past, I've asked you just to submit questions via the WebEx chat feature, and then at the end, I try to do as many of those as I can. And as always, I would cover any questions that I wasn't able to address live after the fact via email. Today, because I'm anticipating that we're going to run out of our hour before we run out of topics, including questions or demos, what I'm going to ask you to do is we go through each of the features. If you think that a deep dive, a mini webinar, almost a video blog of a demo or an explanation of that feature would be something that you would consume and find valuable, please indicate that in the WebEx chat. What I'll do after the webinar is over is I'll take a look at all of the suggestions you have for features you'd like a deep dive on, and I'll go ahead and I'll build 10, 15, 20-minute videos relative to those features, so that, and we'll put them up on our YouTube and on our website, and then you'll be able to go out and access those as needed. And I'll know which ones are interesting as opposed to just guessing which ones to do. This way we all win, and we can build up a quick, short video library, I guess, of 11.1.5 and 11.1.6 features that are of interest. So thank you in advance for doing that. I look forward to seeing what features are interesting. So let's move on to what are the new features in 11.1.5. We'll start out with some changes to reporting. One of the new things that you can add to a report is a schematic. Now, schematics start out as diagrams presented in a technology called SVG. An SVG file, unlike a JPEG, that's actually a file full of vectors where you describe shapes and their size in a text format. So it's actually editable. Well, you can take this SVG file and edit it, and per some actually I found very clear documentation from IBM, you can add keys to all of the shapes that you would like Cognos to plot data on. And then you can plot your data on that SVG in a report. So take, for example, a shop floor, or maybe even better yet, an airplane. I think we're all familiar with seating charts on an airplane. Let's suppose that you have an SVG file that lays out all the seats in the plane, and you can edit that SVG file and give each seat a unique address, a unique data value. And then in your package, in your data module, in your database somewhere, you have data about seat occupancy where the seat ID matches that ID that you've embedded in the SVG. That way you can marry your data to the layout, and as shown in the picture here, you can plot, let's say, the seats that are available or the seats that are occupied. by that cross-reference between the identifier in your data that represents a seat and the identifier that you've embedded in your SVG. Introduced in 11.1.5 was the ability to search on a map. So there is a little magnifying glass icon on the map. You can click it, and then you can search for a location, and if that location is one of those that is in your data set that's being plotted, one or more, perhaps, all the matches for the data that matches your search criteria will be presented. You can click on it. It will auto-zoom you to the area that you've clicked on. So this is just another way to leverage a map. This works in reporting, particularly well. Remember, in reporting maps, these Mapbox maps, that's the partnership with IBM Mapbox and Pitney Bowes, right? These maps only render in HTML. So do keep that in mind. It's an interactive map that now offers the ability to search. Moving on to dashboards in 11.1.5, you can do an awful lot of customizations to the look and feel of your dashboard in 11.1.5. Many features have been added relative to look and feel and layout. And one of those is the ability to change the color, location of your tabs in your tabbed dashboards, including adding a icon in addition to the text for your tab if you wish. So as you can see here, all of this is done through the property sheet. You can show tabs or not. So if you have a dashboard with exactly one tab, you could turn that tab off. That's what this little tab switch here does. If you have more than one tab, of course, that switch doesn't apply. But then you can determine the position, left, right, top, or bottom that the tabs will present, as well as the color of the text, the color of the bar that shows which tab you're on, as well as the background color, the fill color. And then if you wish, you can even add an icon to your tab. So lots and lots of customization. You'll find a theme in dashboards with the enhancements that come out. They're all about enhancing look and feel. Well, I can't say all about. Many are about enhancing look and feel, giving us more control over how the dashboards look than in previous releases. Sometimes it's important to be able to understand visualization performance on your dashboard. How long is the query taking behind the visualization versus how long does it take to actually render the visualization type that I've selected? There is a feature you can invoke with the control period on your keyboard that will express these performance metrics for you. It will also give you access to a panel where you can actually look at some of the behind-the-scenes messaging that's going on, as well as the visualization spec, as it's called, which can be instructive. But primarily what I've found that I'm using this for is understanding troubleshooting performance and understanding whether the performance is on the query or the performance bottleneck is on the rendering side. So this control dot feature gives me visibility into the performance metrics. It's kind of like the performance metrics capability that was introduced in reporting a while back, where you could see virtually the same kind of information. How long was the query versus how long was the rendering. But now you have that for dashboards as well. Another big change in dashboards in 11.1.5 is relative to how you view your business data. Those of us who have written reports in the past using cubes are very used to the notion of being able to expand a level, the product line, year, and see the actual values. If we were working with sample data and we expanded product line, I'd see camping equipment and mountaineering equipment and personal accessories. If I expanded the year level, I would see 2018, 2019, 2020. Those are called members. And in the OLAP world, we've been used to seeing those, but we couldn't leverage that kind of access in a dashboard. We couldn't see the members. We could see the levels. We could see the structure of the hierarchies in our dimensions, but we couldn't see members. Cognos in 11.1.5 now presents the members. You just have to expand the members. But here's the thing. In addition to giving us member access in OLAP data like DMR or dynamic cubes or power cubes or what have you, we can do it with relational data as well. So all the non-measures in your package, in your uploaded file, in your data module, have the option of expanding them, and you can then see the individual values. So even if it's relational, they're referred to as the members. So you can expand members in dimensional and OLAP data. You can control how many members will display before the user has to either click a load more link, or you can control whether it's actually a search link at that point. You can search for members. You can leverage the members by dragging them from the data source onto your canvas. So, for example, if you wanted to filter a column chart to show only web, telephone, and special orders, you could control-click web, telephone, special, and perhaps a measure like revenue. Drag those onto the canvas. Cognos will present you with a chart filtered to web, telephone, and special. So not only do you get to see them, you get to use them. You get to drag them into your visualizations or up into the filter docs at the top to set filters for the tab or for the dashboard. In 11.1.5, Cognos continues its theme of enhancing crosstabs and dashboards. In previous releases, things like being able to resize row and column headings, wrap text, and things were introduced. In 11.1.5, IBM has introduced this notion of showing or hiding rows and columns in a crosstab. So I guess the idea is if you have a very busy crosstab, a crosstab with rows that are not interesting to me, while I am using the crosstab, I can right-click on a row or a column and I can choose hide. And that will temporarily render invisible the row or column. It'll replace it with a blue line. Now, if I'd like to see that row or column after I've hidden it, I can double-click the line and that will reveal the hidden value. And also, if I want to just reveal all of the hidden rows and or columns, I can select the widget. There's a Show All button on the visualization toolbar. But the idea is that this gives me control over the visibility of rows and columns while I am interacting with the data. Do keep in mind, though, that just because I've hidden a row or a column, it doesn't subtract the values for that row or column from the summary. The summary summarizes all of the rows and the columns, whether they're visible or not. So this is just a notion of removing noise while I interact with a crosstab by hiding and then maybe re-showing hidden rows and columns in the crosstab. Continuing with our theme of enhancing crosstabs, this enhancement has to do with missing or null values in a crosstab. Sometimes in our data, we don't have a measure value for a particular intersection or intersections in our crosstab. In previous releases, we had very little control over what was placed in those intersections for which I had no value. With 11.1.5, I can right-click on the intersections of my crosstab, click the Format button, and I get an option to express the text I wish to place in the intersection when a value is missing. So in my example here, I entered the -- as my text. So in the top dashboard, nothing was entered. And so you see the no value legend was there when there was a missing value, a null value, a lack of a measure for a particular intersection. And down the bottom crosstab, you can see for all of those intersections for which no values existed, my -- is used. You can use this to express zeros in those intersections if you wish. You can express spaces. You can put n/a. Literally any text can be used, if you wish, to express your missing values in a way that makes sense for the particular analysis with this enhancement. Another enhancement in dashboards is the notion of drilling through from one dashboard to another. Now, in previous releases, you could drill through from a dashboard to a report. And the mechanism by which I passed the context of my dashboard to the report was basically parameters. In my target report, I would create a bunch of filters. I would throw parameters in those filters. In my calling dashboard, when I defined the drill through to the report, I would map data from my drill through tab to the parameters in my report. And when I right-clicked on a value and clicked the drill through button, it would pass the values of what I right-clicked on to the parameters, and then the report would run with the context of the value I right-clicked on. With a dashboard to dashboard drill through, there's no parameter mapping because dashboards don't have a concept of a parameter. So how does the mechanism work? How does the context of my calling dashboard get passed to my target dashboard? Well, it does it by virtue of Cognos automatically generating all tab filters in the target dashboard. So you create your target dashboard. You create it from the same data source as your starting dashboard. You add no filters to it at all, let's say. You save it. In your calling dashboard, you set up the drill through link, and you don't do any mappings at all. You just say, here is the dashboard I'd like to drill through. You right-click on a value on that tab where you defined the drill through in your dashboard. On the case here in my example, I right-clicked on the bar representing female and photography. I click the drill through button, and Cognos launches in your switcher. It'll actually keep your calling dashboard open. It opens the new dashboard in your switcher, and it places all tab filters for gender and product line, matching female and photography, the value I right-clicked on. Thus, my calling dashboard is filtered to the value I right-clicked on in my starting dashboard. So rather than mapping parameters from a dashboard to a report, Cognos maps all tab filters from the calling dashboard to the target dashboard. Moving on now to data modules. Data modules have been enhanced in Release 5 in a couple of ways. The first way is in the world of intent-based modeling. So as a reminder, intent-based modeling is the notion of selecting your potential data sources and then entering a phrase or a collection of keywords that describe your analytic intent for the data module. The notion here is that IBM will use an analytics of the metadata of the sources you selected to develop a proposal of the tables that you would need to model to match the intent you described. In previous releases, the intent you typed in may or may not actually match the metadata for the data sources you selected. In other words, you had no visibility to the metadata. So the intent you typed in, if you will, you were sort of going blind in hoping for a match. The enhancement is this word cloud. This word cloud is actually a presentation of the metadata that is in the selected sources. Now, in the example I showed here, I actually selected 4 schemas from my data source. Each schema has a different color. You can see that the keywords in the word cloud are color-coded. They match the schema they came from. Size of the word, of course, indicates how often that keyword is leveraged in that metadata. So this gives me a bunch of visibility to the contents of my selected schemas and should guide the selection of an intent that will create a high-quality proposal as I model. I can click on the keywords. It's an active picture, and indeed I can specify the maximum number of keywords as well. There's some options there on the right-hand side. But the idea is I can click on keywords. I could still just type in an analytic intent phrase. I don't have to use the keywords, but this enhancement gives me the visibility I lacked before as into the metadata that is known about the schemas that I selected as I begin my modeling task. Another enhancement in data modules has to do with custom tables. So in 11.1, there was the introduction of this create table notion to data modules where I could create tables right within the data module user interface. That might be a copy of a table so that I could do multiple joins to the same table. Time dimensions come to mind for that. Could be that I highlight 3 tables in the interface and then I create a joined view of those tables. Lots of different options, unions, intersections, and so on. But after I created them, to see how they were created, to see what their constituent parts were, I had to edit the definition. I had to right-click or invoke the action menu on the item and then click the edit option, whatever the edit option that was presented. I didn't have a visual view at all of what constituted one of these new tables. And now I do. So there's a new tab introduced in data modules called Custom Tables. In there will be listed all the custom tables that have been defined in the data module. If you select one, it will show you how it was defined, as shown there on the screen. So, the combined view is made up of the join and the brand and the Go Sales Query view, and the target was actually developed as the result of joining target and country, right? So you've got now a picture that expresses the definition of the custom table that you created in the interface, whereas you had no real way to view the constituent parts of a custom table before now. You can also use the custom tables. You can actually begin creating a custom table in that tab, as well as see all the custom tables that you had previously defined in the data module. Another data module enhancement is the ability to see the SQL for the tables in your data module. So you can right-click or invoke the action menu for a table in the data module and choose Show Query Information, and you'll be able to see the SQL that would be generated when that table or view or union has been referenced in a report or a dashboard. So this is a way for you to see whether the SQL that's generated from the object in the data module is the SQL you expected it to be. You have both the Cognos SQL and a native SQL view. You cannot modify the SQL in this pop-up. This is an informational pop-up only so that you can determine if the SQL is what you expected and matches the definition you had in mind. Moving on from data modules now, let's look at just an overall managing Cognos enhancement. This one has to do with uploaded files. So in the past, if I dragged a file into the interface or I clicked New Uploaded File, the one and only place that file would reside when it was uploaded would be my content for the user doing the upload. While there was a way for you to navigate in Team Content and click the plus button in the top of the panel and say Upload File so you could target a folder in Team Content for that uploaded file, the default way when you drag a file in or when you click New Uploaded File, the default location was going to be My Content, and there was no way to change that in previous releases. Starting with 11.1.5, on a role-by-role basis, I could actually customize the default uploaded file location. So if there was a collection of users in finance and you wanted all of their uploaded files to reside in a finance folder in Team Content, and then there was another group of people in sales and you wanted all of their uploaded files to default to going to a folder in the sales part of Team Content, you could leverage this role customization. And for the finance role, specify the finance folder for uploaded files. And for the sales role, you could specify the sales location for the uploaded files. Just giving you a way to avoid having uploaded files go into My Content by default on a role-by-role basis. Another management enhancement is the ability to save or burst report outputs to a simple storage service, a cloud service for organizing your documents. So some organizations have invested in, say, an Amazon S3 or IBM Cloud Object Storage, a way for them to distribute documents in a centralized location on the cloud. And it was difficult for Cognos users to directly leverage the cloud-based document repositories because there was no integration there. So you would run Cognos, you would save your output and then manually move that output file up to your S3 provider location. In 11.1.5, it's possible for you now to integrate your Cognos Analytics environment to your S3 endpoint such that one of the delivery options when you run a report is to save your report to your S3 endpoint, to your Amazon storage location, or to your IBM Cloud Object Storage location. So it's just another distribution method that bypasses the manual process of gathering outputs from Cognos and placing them up in your object storage location. And those are the enhancements available in Release 11.1.5. So let's take a look at the enhancements available in Release 11.1.6. First thing you'll notice about R6 is that the icons have all been updated. Now, Cognos Analytics isn't the only product IBM is updating as far as look and feel. They have a goal of having a consistent user experience across all of their products. So they are modifying the icons in Cognos Analytics as the first step toward that in CA. The icon modification, this is all based on IBM's open source Carbon design system. You can find out more information about that out on www.carbondesign.com if you're interested. It goes well beyond icons. But the notion here is that you're going to hear more about Carbon design as you hear more about the plans that IBM has to provide this consistent experience across all IBM products. So we're seeing it now in CA. You'll see it in PA and other products very, very soon. Another overall enhancement, if you will, is the available of very extensive help features now under the help button in the top right of the application bar in R6. Now, all of these help features were available somewhere on the web, but nowhere were they organized in one spot for a user of Cognos Analytics to quickly launch into all of the different artifacts and resources available to help them get the most value out of Cognos Analytics they can. That's really the goal behind this new panel. So this new Learn panel gives you quick access to the IBM Knowledge Center. It gives you recommended videos and postings and tutorials, a quick launch into the Cognos Analytics community where people can post questions. You can see blogs from experts and analytic champions. Events are advertised there. There's discussion groups. You can see what's new. There's a quick launch to the what's new documentation for this release and, of course, future releases. This is, if you will, the organized one-stop shop to get access to all of the help resources to enable an end user to self-serve to get the most value out of Cognos Analytics they can. Now, I mentioned in 11.1.5 there were a number of enhancements to crosstabs. That theme continues in Release 6. In this case, it's about expanding OLAP hierarchies in a crosstab. So this will not apply to your relational data. That'd be your uploaded files, your data modules. This would apply to your cube data, power cubes, dynamic cubes, TM1, DMR, and so on. The idea here is if you leverage that kind of data in your dashboard and you drag a level, let's say product line, into your rows, and maybe a level like years into your columns, because it's OLAP data, the whole notion of parent and child members is baked into that data source type. So once you've added a level to a crosstab, like I did with product lines here in the rows, you can expand them. So you see these little plus expander minus collapser. I expanded the product line outdoor protection and I saw its children members, which would be the product types first aid, insect repellents, and sunscreen. And then I expanded first aid and I got to the children of first aid, which are the products for aloe and calamine and so on. So this allows me to traverse the hierarchy not by drilling down, which I could still do, but by expanding, which allows me to keep all of the rest of the members visible, as well as see the children of the member that I expand. And I can do that on either axis. Up here on the column axis, I dragged the year level over, and then I expanded the member 2010 and saw the quarters, which is the level below year. And if I expanded a quarter, I would see months and so on. So this gives me the ability to work with my OLAP data in a crosstab and leverage the notion of the hierarchies that are baked into the dimensions within my cubes. In 11.1.6, the dashboard toolbar is now docked at the top of the dashboard when you're working with widgets. So, for example, I selected this summary widget here. Usually, in 11.1.5 and before, right, the toolbar would show up on the left or the right of it, and it would be vertical. And sometimes I had to figure out where it was because I couldn't always necessarily tell. Now, by default, when you edit a dashboard or you create a new dashboard, the The toolbar is docked at the top. You can click the undock and it will behave like it did in 11.1.5 and before. It will move next to the widgets as you select them. But if you prefer to have your buttons always be in one place, which would be up at the top of the screen, you can leave it docked at the top, just like it will be by default. Now, at the top right of the interface, there is also a new toolbar. So they've taken a couple of things, for example, the expand to full screen, out of the application bar and down into this new toolbar. And you'll see there's a couple of things in the new toolbar. Filters, which opens and closes the filter docks. The Alt tabs and this tab filter docks are opened and closed by this button. The property button is also now here on this app bar, and it's labeled as properties. It's not just the icon, and that opens and closes the properties panel. And then there's this new thing called fields, which is brand new in R6. The fields button opens the new fields panel. The fields panel expresses the data slots for the selected widget in the canvas. So as you select different widgets, different visualizations in the panel, the data slots for that visualization will appear. And you can very easily examine and modify the contents of the data slots for visualizations through this panel. Now, if you have used Cognos Analytics in the past, you know that to expose the data slots in previous releases in your dashboard, you needed to click the Expand button in the top right corner. The Expand button hasn't gone away, but it has a new purpose in R6. In R6, the Expand button places you in what is called Focus Mode. Focus Mode is basically a maximized view of a visualization. So if when you click in either View Mode, when you're consuming a dashboard, or Edit Mode while you're modifying or creating a dashboard, if you click on that Expand button now in the top right corner, it will maximize the visualization to fill your screen, giving you easy display, easy access to all the details of the visualization. When you're done examining the maximized visualization, you can click the Collapse button, which is also in the top right corner, and then the visualization will go back onto the canvas in its original size. So the Focus Mode Expand button is now about maximizing the size of the visualization so you can quickly review the content, and then you can collapse it after you've completed your review. Another dashboard enhancement has to do with labeling your measures. So sometimes a measure's name is not sufficient to express all the details about the measure. This particular enhancement, it allows me to add a prefix or a suffix to the number under the notion of putting units next to the numbers. So, maybe your quantities are metric tons, or maybe your lengths are feet or meters. Maybe you have eaches, like I have here in the example. Whatever your units are, you can leverage this format feature where you can put a label on a measure. Moving on to enhancements to the AI assistant. Two enhancements here in 11.1.6. The first one is called Guided Dashboard Creation. And this is really a streamlining of what used to be a two-step process in previous releases down to a one-step process. The idea goes something like this. You asked a question in previous releases. Show me revenue by product line for 2018. And Cognos, the assistant, would respond with suggested visualizations that matched your request. And then below those visualizations, there was a link labeled Create a Dashboard from the Charts. If you clicked that, it would leverage the chart context that your question had expressed and actually create a whole dashboard automatically for you from that context. Two steps. Ask the question, get a result, and then click the Create a Dashboard from the Charts. That's been reduced down now to one step because the Create Dashboard command has been enhanced to understand context, like generate a dashboard for the top 10 products by profit. You can just type that into the assistant, and it will leverage the advanced analytics, the information that it has gathered and stored about your data to generate a dashboard with the context of top 10 products by profit. So two steps down to one because the Create Dashboard command has been enhanced made smarter, if you will. The other enhancement for the assistant is called personalized recommendations. As you interact with the assistant, as you ask it questions, show me revenue by product line and year, and it presents you proposals, scatter chart, line chart, bubble chart, it keeps track of the fact, for example, that you go for the line chart. And so it'll actually change what it recommends, at least the order of what it recommends, so that the line chart bubbles over to be the first item because it knows that that's going to be your preferred view for the data. That learning, that machine learning, goes on via the assistant. The enhancement in Release 6 gives the administrator a certain amount of control, and it gives the end user a certain amount of control. From the administrator side, there is a new capability. If you click Manage People Capabilities, you'll notice an AI capability with a sub-capability called AI Learning. If you are a member of a group or role that's been assigned the AI Learning capability, Cognos will learn your habits in the assistant. If your group or role is not assigned to the AI learning capability, then Cognos will not perform this learning on your behalf. So the administrator gets to control which groups of users Cognos learns about and which ones they don't. So that's sort of part one. Part two of the enhancement is me, the end user. So let's suppose that AI learning is indeed going on for me, and I'd like to shut it off temporarily. I can go to my personal menu under Preferences, and one of the advanced options there would allow me to turn off this learning. And I can do that for a time, or I guess I could turn it off and leave it off. But the idea is I have the control over that. The other thing I, as the end user, can control is whether I can delete what Cognos has previously learned about me. Let's suppose that how I work with Cognos has changed. Perhaps what I did in the beginning that it learned is no longer germane for me. So there is actually an option in that same personal menu on my preferences to reset the learning. So in other words, tell Cognos to forget and start learning again from now forward. So two pieces. Who does Cognos learn about? That's in the administrator's control with the capability. And my own personal control about is the learning on or off, and should I reset it so that it forgets what it knows? Explorations have been enhanced in a couple of ways. The first is that you can now use standalone calculations as the target for the analytic features. So in the past, if you had a standalone calculation, you could not look at that as a target in a relationship diagram. You couldn't really leverage those standalone calculations in the assistant. If you had a decision tree visualization and a dashboard or a story or an exploration, those standalone calculations couldn't be leveraged in those advanced analytic visualizations. Now they can. And so if you have standalone calculations that you want to have as targets for Cognos to understand the predictive influence of the other data contained in that data source on that calculated column, now you can. So that's one of the enhancements. The other enhancement has to do with information about time series data. So if you create a visualization that includes time series information, whether or not you turn on visibility to the forecast model, Cognos may develop a forecast model from it. It may be possible to do so. And if you're using an exploration and you have a time series chart like the line chart shown there, and a time series forecast model is computed, then in the details tab of the information's panel on the right-hand side, you may find information about that time series. There's three types of information it might present: unusual values, seasonal effects, and trend information. There's examples of all three of those here on the slide. So a trend information might be something along the lines of the values of sales have a strong upward trend or a slight upward trend. I've seen that too. Unusual values would be that the value of sales is either particularly low at this point in time or particularly high at this point in time. And then from a seasonal perspective, you might see something along the lines of, sales has a strong annual effect. The largest values typically occur in November, and the smallest typically occur in July. So it's just more interpretation of the time series data that it's using to create forecasts when you turn them on is now expressed in text insights in the Details tab for that visualization in an exploration. Mapping has a couple of enhancements in R6. The first is that you can use categorical data to color maps. Now, in previous releases, when I used the location in the region or the location in the points, the color for the region or the size and color for the point had to be measures. They couldn't be non-measures or quote-unquote categorical columns. Text columns, for example. Now they can in R6. So instead of having revenue or quantity or counts, I have an event type. An event type is an enumerated set of text: a flood, hail, funnel cloud. This is weather data, as you can see. And Cognos will use the categorical palette that you have assigned to the map and color each value according to the palette. And so you see, the values are not measures. Now, the value in Wisconsin was heavy rain. So this gives me yet another way to leverage these maps. When you're using a region layer and generating a chloropleth map, in the past I could only use measures to color those regions. Now I can use non-measure data, categorical data. And it turns out I can also use them in point size. What I found interesting about point size, as you'll see, I did size and color this event type. Notice that what I got was concentric rings. So the size and the color, what's the size measure? How is it sizing? It's sizing based on the count of the value. So if you hovered over each ring, you'd actually see what event type it was and what the count of records for that event type was on the points. So I thought that was very, very interesting. And oh, by the way, you can use the same thing in latitude and longitude points. You absolutely can. I didn't show it here, but all three slots will support categorical color and size. Excuse me. Another change in mapping, it's a subtle one, but in previous releases, the way that invalid or unrecognized locations was handled was effectively to give you either a hazard sign that you clicked on that gave you information about the missing or ambiguous or unrecognized locations. Or in the case of latitude and longitude, if you gave it a coordinate that it couldn't plot, it didn't exist, it plotted the data at point 00. Now, taking the second one first, latitude and longitude, when it attempts to plot a latitude and longitude that doesn't exist, it will plot nothing rather than plot the data at the point, the coordinate 00. And you'll get a warning that says you've got coordinates that I cannot plot, and it'll give you the coordinates. So that's sort of specific to latitude and longitude. And then in general, about invalid or unrecognized locations of any type, whether those are region locations or point locations or coordinates like latitude and longitude, much more enhanced information is presented about those that are unknown. Certainly, it's going to continue to give you the list of ambiguous and unrecognized locations. But if by omitting those values, the domain of the map is changed. What does the domain mean? The domain means that the overall values. So let's suppose that one of the unrecognized values was one of the largest contributors to the overall measure being plotted. So if we're plotting revenue, and we're removing a region, can't plot a region that's got $25 million, a very, very large amount. Well, you're going to be told that, hey, 2 of the data points have been removed from the map, and they were big values. So the legend in the map, right, versus the values that I took out, right, the legend in the map goes from 0 to 25. The values I took out totaled to 4,000. It would have made a big difference in the map. See, the notifications now tell you not only what wasn't possible to plot, but also how big an impact it has by not plotting it. Cognos Analytics notebooks. In previous releases that supported notebooks, you could use Python as the programming language for your notebook nodes. Starting with 11.1.6, not only can you still use Python, but you can also use the R programming language to define. You just have to change your kernel from the default, which is Python, to R, and off you go. Reports have been enhanced in 11.1.6. One of those enhancements is the introduction of this new data container called a data table. A data table is kind of like a list in that you drag columns over. When you run, it presents data in rows and columns. However, a list is rendered on the Cognos server, whereas a data table is rendered on the user's browser. Now, this browser-side rendering has some pros and cons. The pros are it can be very, very fast and very, very interactive. Interactive by, for example, adding filters on the fly, expanding and collapsing the groups that are defined in the data table are examples of this kind of interaction. The con is that a data table is only supported in HTML output. So if you're writing a report for an interactive online experience, and a list is an appropriate way to present your data, you can get a lot of features and functions out of a data table that you wouldn't be able to get out of an ordinary list. Ordinary lists are still there. They still work the same way they did. They're terrific for all output formats, including PDF and Excel, but they're not as interactive as a data table would be. Another enhancement in reporting has to do with the 11.1 visualizations. There's two enhancements in that visualization gallery. The first one is specific to the 11.1 column and bar visualizations. And the enhancement is that they now support multiple measures in the length slot. Prior to this, you could only plot a single measure. With this enhancement, as you can see from my example, you can add multiple measures to the length data slot, thus, in my case, getting a bar per measure. Because it's allowing me to have multiple measures, it's also created this measures from length special item, and I can put that special item into color, for example, and therefore I can have a palette assigned to each measure. And I can control that palette, right? I can use the palette property. I can even use custom palettes that I've defined elsewhere because this is an 11.1 visualization after all. But the enhancement is that it allows me to plot multiple measures in the same column or bar chart now. The other 11.1 visualization enhancement in reporting has to do with drilling up and drilling down. So this is an OLAP data source. I've dragged a dimension into my visualization. Prior to this release, I could not do a drill up, drill down. I didn't have the explore button where I could click on it and click a drill up or drill down option. The fact that it was OLAP was effectively ignored in the visualization. Now, when I use any 11.1 visualization and I drop the OLAP data into the data slots, when I run, I will now have the option to do drill up and drill down, which I did not have before. Data modules have a couple of interesting enhancements as well. The most important one, I think, is this showing unused items in your data sources. So when you expand your data source pane, you'll see colored when you enable by clicking the sprocket here and enable the show unused items. You'll see which tables are not in use in your data module, as well as if you expand a table that is in use, you'll see any columns that are not part. Maybe you remove them, maybe they're new. Maybe that they've been added since you built your data module. So this is a great way to be able to examine the metadata for a data source, a data server specifically, that could change. And what has changed? And what have I not included in my data module that is new? Now, prior to 11.1.6, when I see this kind of thing and I say, oh, look, the retailer and promotion data and these measures are not in my data module, what I would do is I would actually have to drag the entire table into my data module, which replaces the table that's there, and then adds the missing columns. And it adds all the missing columns. In R6, we have some features around that as well. I can add individual columns to a table in my data module. So in the case where I notice I am using the sales fact table, but I am not using the quantity, and I'd like to add quantity and only quantity from this table to my data module, I can simply drag quantity into my sales fact table, and it adds just quantity so that I can now drag individual columns from the source into my data module. Also, I can automatically reload the metadata from within the data module. So, perhaps I am modeling, I've gone off to the database, I've made a change in the database, and now I'd like to get access to the database changes in my data module. What I would have to do is go to the administration. I have to go manage data servers and then reload metadata there and then go back to my data module to see the updated metadata. Not anymore. Now, for data servers, I can I can select to reload the metadata for a schema that's at part of my data module, and then immediately turn around and see what changed in that metadata. So I can do that all from within the data module. I think that's going to help tremendously as we model databases that are in flight, things that are changing on a cadence. This will give me much better and faster, and well, even easier maybe, visibility to it. Framework Manager has a new command line utility. This is an interesting one. I wasn't aware that this could be a problem, but apparently it can be. When you change Framework Manager from one database technology to another, even if you have the same tables and columns, some databases are case sensitive, and perhaps you went from a database that wasn't to a database that was, or vice versa. And you need a quick and easy way to go through your model and change the case of your items to maybe all uppercase or all lowercase. That's what this utility does. This utility goes through and allows you to specify that we change tables, views, stored procedures, user-defined functions, and so on to a single case. So it's command line. It's specifically for the purpose of changing the case of the items in the Framework Manager model. And again, the example that IBM gives as to why you might need to do such a thing is when you migrate your model to a different database, you might encounter errors that are related to missing tables or columns that are not missing, but they're not recognized because they're a different case than the new database. So, new utility there. Two last things with R6. From an administration perspective, if you own Watson Knowledge Catalog, which is, in a gross oversimplification of Watson Knowledge Catalog, is a way for you to centrally manage and govern your data assets. You can define a connection in Watson Catalog Manager to a data asset, and then Cognos can turn around in the data server tool and just access that definition. That way you're not propagating that same definition to multiple tools, and then ultimately when that definition changes, you have to update multiple tools. And this way you can reference Watson Knowledge Catalog and pick up the definition from your central location. I'm told this is the first of many integrations with Watson Knowledge Catalog coming for Cognos Analytics, so I'm excited to see what comes next. And finally, there's been an update to the licensing. Prior to now, the exploration tool that was introduced with 11.1 has only been available to people leveraging an Analytics Explorer license. IBM just announced that they have changed the licensing so that the exploration tool is now available at the next license level lower, the Analytics User license. So if you have Analytics users, you can now authorize them to leverage the exploration tool. Heretofore, you could not because they required the next level up. And that, my friends, is R6. Whew, it's a lot. And as I predicted earlier on, there is no time for questions or demonstrations. So let me remind you, please, to submit any questions that are still burning in your head via the chat here in the WebEx. We will collect them all, and I will answer all of them via email. And please enter in the chat any of the enhancements that you would like a deeper dive on, a 10-minute, 20-minute video to really explore a feature that piqued your interest. All that remains to be said is thank you once again for joining me for an information-packed hour of what's new in Cognos Analytics 11.1.5 and 11.1.6. I hope to have you join me again on another webinar very, very soon. Thanks a lot.